who am I? I lived and worked in Antarctica as a topographical and hydrographical surveyor I worked for 3 years of my life. We call the British Antarctic Survey, I call it BAS, B-A-S. It became BAS in 1961, I think. It was FIDS before that, which stands for the Falkland Island Dependency Survey. And the people, we refer to each other as FIDS. We are FIDS. The regions I worked in, the west coast of the Antarctic Peninsula, including the Northern Islands, point south to Alexander Island and the Plateau. I am a member of the British Antarctic Survey Club and the Antarctic Club. The Antarctic Club is invitation only type thing. It's one of these fuddy-duddy British things. There is an Arctic Club. And my name is these days on the map. I had nothing really to do with that. Well, something. You may not see it on my maps because, the scale of the map, but it is on the map of the peninsula, the British map. And it is called the Morgan Upland. It is actually a beautiful place. Very few people have ever seen it, of course. My personal background, I was born in London, of Welsh family. That's very important because not only are we a family, I grew up in a Welsh community in London, but I lived through the war mostly in London because of the forecasting of my mother, because every time we had any bombs, she'd send me off to Wales to my grandparents. But I was in London for the Blitz and the V-bombs. And after my grammar school, I joined the Royal Air Force as aircraftsman second class. That is the lowest rank you can have in the Air Force. And I was a flying officer in the reserves in the end. At the age of 20, I actually got, after officer training, I went to a Battle of Britain station east of London called North Weald. And I was stationed with the aerobatic quadrant, as it was then, called the Black Arrows of Trevor 1 Squadron. I was an assistant station adjutant. I won't bother to tell you what that meant. And while I was that, they posted me to Cornwall as a commanding officer of a World War II radar station, which is CH and G. A G is a navigation system, which is based on time. And CH was what they call chain homing. That was our early warning so-called radar system. And I was there to close the unit. The CH masts are those you are familiar with CH or know they're 350 feet or something. I tried to get the government to take them away. They didn't. Anyway, I have an undergraduate in science and civil engineering, and I did that after my time in Cornwall. I was the youngest person, by the way, on the station. I was 20 years old and I had 46 men. And I guess it's sort of the mess of childhood. You don't know what the heck you're going to do. And this guy came along and he said, I hear you're interviewing with a lot of companies. He said, have you ever thought of going to the Antarctic? And hey, that was it. So I joined what it was called FIDS at that time. I trained as a surveyor with a faculty member from Imperial College London who had been on the British Graham Land expedition in the 1930s. And of course, I knew him for a number of years. And we were training on tellurimeter equipment and theodolites principally. So basically, if you're not really into mapping, Plane table is kind of sketching type way of creating a map. You literally have a table in front of you, you sketch and you take readings around and you draw the map as you go along. That's the old way. Baseline and triangulation, that means you measure a line and you triangulate from the ends of that line and extend the triangles and extend them. And the map of India prior to modern methods was built on baseline and triangulation methods, and the Brits were the experts on the planet, really, I think, on this. They made maps in South America, I'm sure in Canada, certainly in the Far East and all over. Then we moved to trilateration and triangulation. So we don't just do a simple baseline now, we measure the sides of our triangles and the angles. I'm at that level. We moved into a new world after the electronics of World War II. A company in South Africa came up with a device called a tellurometer, which are microwave distance measuring devices, and you have to have an instrument at each end of the line. The master station sends a signal to the second station, which resends a signal to the master station. And by working on things like phase differences and so on, you can get a pretty accurate, in fact, a very accurate by historical standards, distance. And tellurometers worked, at least in my day. I think they might have got better than that, but you run into problems going around the world because we have this kind of spherical thing that we live on. It's not quite spherical, particularly at the poles. It is what we call an oblate spheroid. It's squashed at the ends. And so every time you do an actual map, you have to correct for all of this. And these devices go straight, you get straight lines. So this is what was home for me. I get asked the question, was I really there for 2 years? And the answer is, I was really there for 2 years. It was the British way, because they figured if we had a whole bunch of people who only went down there for a year in those days, we'd have a lot of people die because they didn't know how to live there and so on. And that was absolutely correct. And the world today is so different because now the bulk of the people that work in Antarctica, if they go there at all, go in summer, and it's just coming up to the winter down there. So most of them will be flying out. Or a lot of them these days work from satellite data. They've never been there. They write learned papers about Antarctica, but they have never, ever seen it. Okay, what we're seeing here is the Antarctic Peninsula. I use my little pointer. That thing here, that goes up to South America. It is a southern extension of the Andes, which are some of the biggest mountains on Earth. And there is a gap in between that southern end, which is Chile and Argentina, and the northern part of the Antarctic. And that's called the Drake Passage. The Drake Passage is one of the roughest seas in the world. I've crossed it 6 times, I think, in my life. And this peninsula is basically, it looks like nothing, but how big is Antarctica? Oh, it's about 5.5 million square miles, or 50% larger than the United States. So you have to put that in perspective. What looks like nothing on this map is huge. And Antarctic land is surrounded by sea, obviously, whereas the Arctic is a sea surrounded by land. It's very different. The key points that people talk about are the pole, and they mean the South Pole, which is roughly where my pointer is. And then we talk about the magnetic pole. And of course, people think it's kind of close to the South Pole, but it ain't. To get to the magnetic pole, you follow my little arrow down, somewhere down there. The southern magnetic pole is actually in the sea down there, which is always disturbing, it seems to people, but no, I can't help that. So my life was primarily, let me go back to the other one again. Primarily, I started working when my first summer down there up in the northern part here. And then you come down the side here, you see this island here. That's Adelaide Island. It's about 90 miles long. And this is called Marguerite Bay, this indentation here. And Stonington, my base, is just inside here by my arrow. And we have further down, you'll see on another map I have, there is a big island here called Alexander Island. And between Alexander and the main peninsula is what we call King George VI Sound, which is shelf ice. And it's a substantial landmark. Okay, so this is the area with which I am most familiar. And some of these areas up here, I'm also familiar. I helped make some marine charts up there. I will explain where the ice sheets are. Some of you may have read about the loss of ice. The British had their bases primarily in the peninsula, although we had one base across, this is called the Weddell Sea. And we had one base up here in a place called Halley Bay. And the Halley Bay base over the years has moved about 6 or 7 times. When they first built it, it was the IGY, that's the International Geophysical Year. And then we started putting a base there that was initially temporary, but then they put which was primarily working on upper air studies. And gradually, because they were on shelf ice, that shelf ice became unacceptable. It started breaking up, so they moved it. And they moved the base about 6 times, maybe 7 times, I lost count. In recent years, in fact, about 2 years ago, they'd been watching. The present base is built on stilts. I don't have a picture of it. It was apparent there was a crack appearing in that ice sheet. And so people don't winter there anymore. They only go in there for summer, as I understand it. And that has recently kicked off a huge iceberg, which has gone north. That's called the Brunt. I'll talk about that again. Okay, so that's where we are. Okay, so you can see here on this map, because you have the highlighting, the American bases were either the pole or down here on the Ross Ice Shelf. And the highest point of Antarctica is you follow really the line of the Andes down in this area here, and that's Mount Vinson. It's not, again, in the middle where you expect it to be. It's the Vinson Massif is about 16,000 feet. It's not Himalayan style. The Antarctic Treaty is important to understand. It came in force in 1961, and basically the people who signed on the treaty said they were going to treat the Antarctic basically as a sort of a laboratory, and they're going to conserve the fauna, flora, and so on and so on and so on. and various additions came to the Antarctic Treaty over the years, the seals, the marine living resources, and so on. And some of these things, work or they don't work. Environmental protection. There is no government of the Antarctic. The tourist industry, there is a sort of a loose association that covers tourist ships. The problem with tourism is that they tend to all go to the same places, and the places are where I worked, in fact. I just noticed on the Harvard trips, in fact, that I get sent those things, and they're going to some of the places that I actually mapped. So this is an idea of the Antarctic with the different claims. I think there are many more claims than this. You can see the little rectangle up here. That's the northern part, and that's this down here. And a very important base here in the middle is now operated by Ukraine. That was a very important base at the time of the discovery of the hole in the ozone layer. In fact, on my way down, I helped with my fellow Feds to put the equipment, some of the equipment in that base from the ship. We had to bring the ship alongside. There's a massive piece of massive parabolic, antenna thing. And that was a British base called the Argentina Islands. We called it that. I don't know. I have been there since the Ukrainians were there. I was there actually with my wife 6 years ago, she tells me now. And all of these areas, as you see, different claims, British claims, Norwegian claim, Argentine claim, Chilean claim. It doesn't mean anything. There's nothing on the ground. It means very little, and the bases don't really reflect that. It's just that there is this in the background, and people talk about mineral deposits and so on. None of that's ever been worked on. But we are concerned about the environment. There's no question about that, and I'll talk about some of the things that have been happening. Okay. How much do we know? We don't know very much, actually, because it's huge. And to give you an idea of the British base size, my base had, I was at a place called Stonington Island, which was named after Finn Roddy, an American polar guy in the 40s. My base had 12 men, and I moved to the southern end of Adelaide Island, which I'll point out again. It's about 70 miles away, and we're about the same number. Tiny, tiny bases, very unlike the American bases. You go to Polar Station or you go to the Ross Sea, very different. Very small numbers. We had no support staff. We took turns to be cook, and we had people who were met men. That means they looked at meteorological things. They floated balloons up in the air and stuff. Some did ice measurements on the glaciers, measuring the movement of the ice and so on. But the rest of us were sort of doing field work, and we went big distances. So we have been increasing the amount of information we have about marine environments, about particularly the ice environments, and glacier flow rates have become credible. When I was down there, they did not exist. And we have a lot of recent theories coming up. I'll talk about some of these if I have time. So It's the windiest place on Earth, in spite of what people say about Mount Washington. That's only because we've never measured. We measure Mount Washington all the time. We don't measure most of the Antarctic because there's nobody there. And certainly over 200 miles an hour. I have skied Mount Washington, by the way, more than once, the upper areas. The lowest temperature ever recorded, Russian base close to the pole of inaccessibility, which is pretty chilly, about minus 90 Celsius. And snowfall is generally less than Sahara. So you get very little snow, except, as I learned, on the west coast of the peninsula, we can occasionally get quite heavy snowfalls. And that leads to some other things like avalanches and so on, which do not occur generally on the continent. The ice generally covers everything except many of the really big mountains. In summer, it does get a little bit close to above freezing point. And in fact, I used to travel at night with my dogs in summer because it was faster running. It was below freezing, guaranteed. And the dogs liked it, they preferred it. It's the cleanest place on Earth. And you say, how clean? Well, one of the things that we have started doing down there, certainly not before my time, but since, is ice core drilling. The ice cores the Brits do are about 6 inches across. And I went to our headquarters in Cambridge, England, by the way. And I was talking to the guy who did the ice core stuff. And I said, how sensitive are your ice cores? I mean, what can you tell me? He said, well, you take an ice core out and you look at the little bubbles in the ice. And he said, I can tell you when the United States stopped having lead in gasoline. I said, wow. So he's taking ice cores in Antarctica, and he could tell me when the United States stopped having lead in gasoline. I was impressed. It is the cleanest place on Earth. For obvious reasons, there's very, very few people there. And we are the dirtiest people on the planet. This is another thing to talk about. It's a very important concept. We call it the Antarctic Convergence, which circles Antarctica. And there's a huge temperature gradient between the main oceans, like the Atlantic Ocean, and you come in the convergence here, and the temperature drops. And in fact, if I went for a swim off anywhere where I was, the temperature was a pretty constant, minus 1.8 Celsius. Of course, it didn't freeze because of the salt. It did freeze, of course, in winter, but it basically, the rest of it didn't freeze because of the salt of the ocean. But the fact that that exists is a really critical thing to understand when you talk about global warming, because what we're seeing now is a breakdown of that convergence, and some of the warm ocean currents. This is a very strong current that goes around Antarctica, but some of the ocean currents from outside are now getting inside here. And I will talk about the Thwaites Glacier. I hope I have time this morning. And that eats away on the underside of these glaciers and is causing a lot of breakoff. Okay, so that's the winds What happens here, we have these, what we call katabatic winds. I don't know what language that comes from. It's certainly not Welsh. But the polar cap is cold, and these winds drop down because they're heavy. And so you often get, as I say, 200-mile-an-hour winds, and they funnel down the glaciers. And that's important to understand too, because that, again, is pressure on the ice and so on. If there is anything that's going to move, it can move. Okay, where did I work? Summer, I used Royal Navy helicopters when they were available. We had one Navy ship. It was the oldest ship in the Navy, which says something about naval intelligence. I'm Air Force, you understand. It was truly the oldest commissioned ship in the Navy, and I thought, wow, you stick it in the Antarctic, ha ha. We used Bass Otter aircraft. We used single-engine aircraft when I was there. Now they still have Otters, but they're twin-engined. And ground transportation was primarily with dog teams. We had versions of skidoos and things, but they have very limited use. If you are going up and down glaciers, you don't want to use machines like that because they fall into crevasses. And the dog teams, I had many exciting times going up and down glaciers. We had muskeg tractors. I'll show you some pictures of some of these as we get going. Muskegs are not as big as snowcats. Some of our ski areas here have snowcats, but okay, working in the field as a surveyor. This is me, actually, north, as my memory tells me, this is north of Stonington base, up on a ridge, and that behind me will be a glacier, and there'll be another ridge, and that is my theodolite, and that's another one of me with, I don't know which area that was. It was just, I picked it out of my slides. This is a tellurometer. Give you an idea what we're working with. And you had one of these at each end of the line you're measuring. And we could measure, I think, 50, 60 miles in length. Most of my measures would have been much less than that, say maybe 20 miles, 30 miles. And they're very accurate. That's not a problem. You can get some funny, well, I won't get into the problems, but there are real problems, reflection and so on. This is something I actually built when I was down there, and it was stuck on the theodolite tripod I put a camera on it so I could take panoramic pictures pretty exactly without shaky hands. And I did, in fact, take a panoramic view of the Morgan Upland. Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures of that. I gave them all back to Bass. So they sit in a library at Cambridge University in England. One day my son will doubtless ask for them, but they were used actually in creating the map of the peninsula that we have. This is classic. We've just been doing a survey thing. We're looking here from one of the ridges north of Stonington. That is a glacier in front of us going down to, this is sea ice here. And that, I believe, is the southern end of Adelaide Island. And I say it's a big island. It's probably 80, 90 miles long. This is a classic dog campsite. You park the dogs out on a line. They are incredible creatures. And our tents were pyramids, double tents, which sleep on airbed. On top of that, we had a sheepskin sort of layer, woolly sheepskin layer, and then a double sleeping bag on top. And we would sleep negative Celsius, no problem at all. Go down minus. Measuring temperature was never anything that I really did. We probably went below minus 40, I'm sure. Here's another picture, which I was here up on the plateau, the Antarctic plateau. This mountain is called Mount Cadbury, and it was named that by the British Graham Land expedition that viewed it from the other side, which is King George VI Sound. And you'll notice some little dots down here. That is our campsite. I took this from up thing. I, with a friend of mine, were the first to ascend this mountain. It's not a big mountain as they go down there. It's 5,000 feet. This is the John Biscoe. That's the ship. As I say, we worked on a shoestring budget. This is the John Biscoe. It's ice-strengthened vessel. That means you can bump into ice without sinking. It was about 1,500 tons. If you're not used to marine measures, the ship that got caught in the Suez Canal the other day was over 200,000 tons. So you can see this is a tiddler, and it had to be that way because basically it gets into the bases, and there'd be 30 of us feds plus the crew on a ship like this. This is another of our ships, the RS Shackleton, which is even smaller. That was about 1,200 tons. And this is an island, which is now a sort of they still have a Bass office there. It operates as a place for tourists to visit. It's an island on the west coast of the peninsula, about halfway down. And I think they use it to sell, mementos to tourists. I don't know. It's not used scientifically anymore. And this, just a picture to give you a sense of the scenery. On the left-hand side of this picture is the peninsula. I'm about halfway down the peninsula here. And you go through a channel where you have vertical black walls on each side called the Le Maire Channel. That was named by French explorer Charcot long time ago. This ship is the Shackleton. This gives a sense of an iceberg. I think people have little idea how big they are. They're huge. And most of the ice of an iceberg is, of course, below the water. And that's what some people, even these, I used to worry about the tourist ships going down because they're not ice strengthened, most of them. And I think the captains have no idea what icebergs are like. But most of the iceberg is below the water. I think about 8/9 of it, something like that. This is one of the Navy helicopters I worked with in summer. What you see lying here on the ground is one of our tents, the pyramid tents, and loading their helicopter was probably the reason I have a hearing problem today. The noise was unbelievable. We had no ear protection. And this is, I think, a beautiful shot because I took it, but behind is an island called Smith Island, which is several thousand feet at the top above sea level. I don't know how, it's 5,000 or 6,000 feet, I think. It's a magnificent island. This helicopter is the one we had left. I had been working, we were trying to link our survey networks that we'd had in the islands with the main plateau. And I was had been dropped with my helper on the plateau, and the other party was being dropped on one of the islands. And the helicopter was about to come down on a ledge, and it bounced and rolled over, stopped about 1,000 feet above the bottom, fortunately. Nobody was killed. A lot of people were shaken. And the pilot in particular, he was, looked to me like a nervous wreck afterwards. This is the other helicopter, anyway. I get this story because a lot of us were learning how to live down there, and that included the Royal Navy. I must say I had great faith in my Air Force pilots. Our pilots were Royal Air Force, although we had one pilot who was RCAF, he was Royal Canadian Air Force. He was a wild guy, but they were superb. However, the Navy was still learning. This is a single-engine Otter. We're loading it, and you notice we have these, what we call sledge boxes. They're designed so that humans could lift them, and I think they still use them. I even have them, some of them up in my house here in Lexington from those days. Single-engine Otter, great plane, short takeoff and landing. This, I believe, was on the southern end of Adelaide Island. Adelaide Island is made up of a Piedmont, which is like an ice sheet on the west side, and the east side are big mountains. And I don't know what condition that ice sheet is in today. When I was there, it was basically used for our summer park for aircraft. And the other was a primary summer park. Winter park was a place called Deception Island, which is up in the north. I'll show you where that is. This is just above Stonington Island. And this is where we parked our planes at Stonington. This is the Northeast Glacier they're on. That's our landing strip. It's quite large. What we have behind is an island called Nenni Island. That's over 2,000 feet. Give you set scale. At the foot to get to the shore is about a mile of sea ice. So typically when I was living in Stonington, if we used the aircraft, we took off from this side. And my second year, I did work from Adelaide Island on the other side. This is how we unloaded from the ship. You can see a lot of those small boxes. And of course, you will see here a muskeg tractor. And that is the Bisco, I think. And that's Nenni Island in the background. This is Stonington Island. We are unloading the tractors. This is what our dogs looked like on base. We strung them out on what we call spans. They were fed regularly. This is Adelaide Island, and we're looking south. In clear weather, the air is such that you can see easily 80 miles to mountains on Adelaide Island that were 80 miles away. You can imagine a starry night down there is unbelievable. It's hard to explain to people here because our atmosphere is so dirty. And down there it isn't. It's a classic dog team up on a glacier. It was not my dog team, this one. This is Stonington Base, and you can see a little hut. I'm taking it from the Northeast Glacier. That's our hut. I'll show you another picture of it in a minute. And that is a mountain we call Roman 4. That's to the south of Stonington Base. and Roman 4 being, that was the I, and that's the V. I climbed that one too. That's the hut. I don't know why that's blurred, the way it is. And that was fairly new when I got there. They put on that extra layer. It was a new design. Here we go. And this is working on our sleds and so on in summer, in preparation, of course, in winter, towards winter, preparation for our big. And we trained by doing things that you would not believe. Jumping off ice cliffs, a crevasse rescue practice. Just to make it real for you, here is a hole that one of my colleagues fell in, a Scot called George MacLeod, and that is further south, and George was lucky to be alive. He's a tough mountaineer, and he climbed out of this hole by himself, which is amazing. He had lots of broken ribs and things, and I was not. We were a party of 6 at the time. I was with 4 of that party, and we were about, probably 50, 60 miles away, and we had to go down. We were up on the plateau. We went down to King George VI Sound, across the Sound, and up to where Ralph and George were to rescue them. That was the sort of thing he did. Field rations, to give you an idea, high calorie, basically that's sugar, that's Quaker oats, you know, that is actually dried milk, that's meat bar, that's soup, the golden cans are butter, and there's the flavor, onions, dried onions. And you had the same every day, and any spare butter. Oh, important ingredient there, chocolate, Cadbury's chocolate, which you craved. His spare butter went to the dogs. So a couple of journeys from Stonington to give you an idea of what it's like. This was a big journey I did in the second year, but our tractors did it in my first year. We went from Stonington Base, which is up here in that area called Marguerite Bay, all the way down on the sea ice. This is sea ice. This is glacier or plateau up on top. We followed that all the way down, and this here is where you join King George VI Sound. That's going down to permanent shelf ice there, from sea ice to permanent shelf ice. And that area presents a problem. And we had 2 tractors do that journey. And when they hit that point, they're the 2 tractors. This is their train when they set off for that journey. One of these tractors fell through a hole there in the ice, the big pressure ice there. I have a slide coming up with that. But that's a year later when I went down with dogs, and that's pressure ice that we had to find our way through. And that's where we lost a Muscat tractor. It's still down there, I'm sure. That's further south on the Sound. You can see it's totally flat. I will talk about that again, because that's been a major change over, not that it's rumpled, but I recently was on a Zoom call where I saw a video of this area taken by one of our young pilots, a woman, beautiful video. I was astounded because this whole area is basically covered by puddles of water. There was never any water there. I have traveled up and down this Sound. It's a big feature. It's the whole thing is hundreds of miles long, and say at the narrowest, it's at least 20 miles wide, and totally flat snow. This is Alexander Island, and the area in between here is the one I'm talking about. It curves around there. And that is what we used to call it permanent shelf ice. Ha, 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 right? And this is the Wilkins ice sheet, and I'll talk about that in a minute. This is the Larsen ABC ice sheets on the east of the peninsula. And to get some idea of distance, it's very hard on this scale. But up here somewhere, there's a little circular island. If you can, I don't think I can, I don't want to play with my slide here. That's where the planes, our aircraft went in winter. They parked up there. It's a dormant volcano. A couple of years or 2 or 3 years after I left that region, the volcano became active, and there were 2 bases. There was a British and a Chilean base on this island, and they had to clear out fast, and a new island was created offshore. Actually, I did go back 6 years ago with a party into basically in the caldera of the volcano. To go from there down to this area here is about 500 miles. So we're not talking about, next door. This is substantial. And there are a lot of islands in between. The area Argentine Island, where I say we did our upper air, one of the upper air things. The other base is Halley Bay, which is off my map down there. Those are the 2 upper air places. And well, while I'm at it, I might as well pass over the hole in the ozone layer. A guy that was doing the research at Argentine Islands is a guy called Joe Farmer. I think Joe is no longer alive. I keep getting these obituary notices. It's really hard for me to keep up. And Joe did his research there, and he was working numbers that he said there's a hole in the ozone layer. And so he went back to Britain, then across to NASA, and he said, hey, you guys, you've been measuring the ozone layer. He said, it's not there. There's a hole in it. And so they dug into the data, and the story goes that somebody had programmed the computer so that readings below a certain number were considered invalid. Ha, ha, ha. Well, of course, that was back in the mid-70s, and there was an international, of course, outcry. All sorts of people started doing research into chlorofluorocarbons, and you all know the story. And the hole in the ozone layer is, I haven't looked at it recently. Last time I looked, it's still there. It's smaller, but it's still there. And there's obviously something else. Anyway, that's Marguerite Bay, that area there. And Stonington Island is sort of somewhere around by Pointer there. Okay, now the Morgan Upland is actually printed on this map. It's there somewhere. Anyway, don't worry about it. My grandkids love it. My wife thinks it should have my first name as well. And of course, I pointed out to her, she has no idea how much space you have on a map. Okay, so this is a picture of an iceberg. Roughly how much is underwater. We had vocabulary for all of bergy bits, growlers, brash ice, tabberg. The tabberg is That's not a tab, that's a tabular berg. This is actually, I think, a picture of the Brunt. And it's a Bass picture. It's not mine. And you say, well, how thick is this stuff? I think Larsen's Sea, and I'll talk about the ice shapes that are broken off. The actual thickness of Larsen's Sea was about 50 meters, which is 170 feet or something. And you say, wow, that's a lot of ice. It is a lot of ice. And you say, well, how far back have you gone with ice drilling? Well, somebody has gone back, they reckon 700,000 years now. That would not be on ice sheets. That would be on the main continent somewhere. I was not party to that. I wanted to show that because I did, just a reminder, we did every so often take star shots. Of course, this is not night. Night in Antarctica is, as I say, unbelievable because the sky is so clean and you see stars that nobody would ever see here. It was important to fix our position whenever we could do that. And that was done in winter. In summer, of course, we had many months, we had just no night, so you couldn't see anything. Okay, some of the things that have changed. Krill. This is a krill. It's a little, creepy crawly. And this is a NASA idea or a photo. I don't know how they do this, but it shows where the krill live. And you can see that it's basically within the Antarctic Convergence. And the krill are the major food. The krill live off plankton. Did I say that? Yeah, here. Phytoplankton. Phytoplankton breed under sea ice, it turns out. Well, we didn't know any of this stuff. Didn't used to know any of it. Now we know it. Now sea ice has gone to hell. And so the number of krill being reduced, of course, it's not a surprise, you know. They're shrimp-like creatures, they're little things. However, they are food for whales, seals, all sorts of animals, you know, that we are trying to protect. Some penguins, not all, some birds even, and they are under attack. That's krill. That is the biggest whale on the planet. That is the blue whale. And I did have a story. I was out with one of my friends. We had a little dinghy on base on Stonington, which was, if you know what clinker built is, it's made of strips of wood. I think it's Norwegian. It's about, I don't know, 7 feet long, 8 feet long, outboard motor on it. And all of a sudden, this thing appears alongside our little boat. I have never seen such a large creature in my life. It started coming and coming and coming until it was this giant mountain alongside us, and then it disappeared. I think it was just curious. It didn't know what to do with us. We're not edible, and off it went. However, if it had hit us in any way, we'd have been dead because you don't survive in minus 1.8 Celsius water. This used to be the most common seal for me, the Weddell seal. Hard to describe them. This is a crab-eater seal. They're kind of sleeker. They had special teeth for eating krill, so I'm told. Somebody said it's the most common seal on the planet. Well, it may be. It wasn't that common for me. The Weddell seal was. This is a leopard seal. And these can be 11 feet, 12 feet long. I've got 10 to 11 there. They're huge things. And in fact, the latest British base is to the southeast of Adelaide Island now. And that is now, we have an airfield there. And that's a much bigger base than our traditional ones. A bio researcher, a woman, was snorkeling, and apparently we reckon she was pulled under by a leopard seal. She wasn't killed by it, she drowned. But it's something I would never do anyway, but you know, hey, she would never have done half the things I did, so I do not blame her. As it so happens, the daughter of one of my old friends was the doctor on the base at the time, and it was a tragic occurrence. Just evening shot. These are emperor penguins, and I just show this because I took these pictures. They are on the southern end of Adelaide Island. You cannot take that picture anymore because the colony is no longer there. It moved. We don't know where to. I went there in winter. Prior to going there, a couple of people had come from the east side. I went from Adelaide Island to the Dions in winter, and they had gotten into trouble. The sea ice broke up, and they had released their dogs. They died. And we still had one of those dogs on base in Adelaide when I was there, called Peppy. I remember Peppy. But this colony was remarkable. You can see their little babies peeking out from under the feet. That's the way they kept warm. That's an Adelie penguin. Now, for me, the Adelies and the emperors are the true Antarctic penguins. That's another, I'll skip that. That's another Adelie. This is a chinstrap. That's a northern type of penguin. And when I was down there 6 years ago, what I saw was more and more of these. They're called Gen 2 penguins. The whole atmosphere has changed there because the warming of the coast has allowed these penguins to take over. The Adelies were hard to see. I never saw these routinely by us down in the southern areas there, did not see them. I did not see chinstraps. So it is remarkable. This is relatively new sea ice. This is just across from Stonington Island, just to show you a picture. Never landed on that. The Argentinian base is up there. More recent ice changes. We have the Brunt, which is going offshore. That went up to South Georgia. This is Larsen. And Larsen A, B, and C, successively 95, 2002, 2015. In fact, in about 2001, somebody wrote to the Boston Globe saying, and all this nonsense of global warming, Antarctica was getting colder. So I felt I had to refute that. I did. And I told them that with my friends on the ground told me that there's about to be a big breakaway. And sure enough, I think within 6 months, my friends were right. Larsen B went off, and that was a big one. And now, most recently, most recently is the Brunt, but Larsen C was absolutely gigantic. You know, people talk about the size of Rhode Island. I don't know, big anyway. And prior to all of those, the Wilkins, which is the west side of Adelaide, Alexander Island, Wilkins Ice Shelf, that was one of the early ones that Bass was tracking. And they'd been trucking the brunt because they were worried that the whole base would go off with the sheet. It didn't, but only just. And I don't know what on earth they're going to do with that base now. This is the latest thing. There's a US, a UK project on the Thwaites Glacier. And the Thwaites is poking off here. And they have discovered, being able to get, now this is the changing nature of technology, allows us to drill through ice, can drill through ice using a water drill, or you can actually put a submersible and come in the other way. I mean, it's just amazing what we can do. There are many areas of Antarctica which are ice covered that we know actually have lakes underneath. That was another revelation that I said, you're going to be kidding me. You mean water? They said, yeah, there's water underneath. I said, wow, okay, we're learning more and more. But the Thwaites Glacier is interesting because we think that that is imminent. There's going to be a chunk there. And that's like a stopper in the bottle. And when the Thwaites goes, there's going to be a speed up of the ice sheet in that area. And this is all where, I don't know where west is, and we never used to use that term. This is called east and that's called west, I don't know. But the sea level rise that I used to hear 3 feet, I never believed that. And I have been talking about global warming with my Antarctic friends for over 50 years. I can't talk about it with most people. Recently, though, young people listen because I would talk about the Antarctic and they said, why do I need to know? It's like talking about another planet. I said, well, it's actually on the same planet. Here's another example. This is now a direct one of mine. I took this photograph from Nenni Island when I was there. This is the Northeast Glacier. This is Stonington Island in the foreground. We used to get up on the glacier by going up this thing we call a ramp. And you'll see here, and this is all, some of the other shots I took are up here. This is called Butson Ridge. And of course, most of the area I was working is much further south. This is the next shot, that's the ramp. You can see here's Stonington Island. You go up the ramp, up here, that's where my aircraft were parked. They were parked up there. Note, Stonington Island, ramp to Glacier, still there, just about. That's 1974. 1990. Whoa, no more ramp. 200 meters of water. Stonington Island is still there. We no longer can use Stonington Island base because you can't get to it except by boat. You can't get there by aircraft. It's not possible. You can't get there by dogs unless you had sea ice, and then you could come down from the Argentinian base up there, but hey, that'd be silly. So this is now a tourist spot if they can get there in summer, but other than that, nobody goes there. And the American huts, which are still there, are just a curiosity. Oh, many other issues. The Thwaites Glacier, which is an imminent problem. King George VI Sound, which is just my concern because I see the water there. I asked my young pilot, I said, I found your video, I said, fascinating. I said, how do you land there? And she said, well, there are people on the ground who make sure that there is a landing strip. They come out in Wellington boots. I said, oh, accelerating glaciers. We know now because we measure glaciers. The glaciers are getting thin. Yeah, we know that. And actually, this is where satellites come in because they can actually measure a decrease in thickness. We couldn't do that with the technology that I had. Measuring lines and measuring angles didn't work. And say from satellites, you could do these things, and lo and behold, we discovered that they are losing thickness. I love this quote. In all my experience, I have never been in any accident of any sort worth speaking about. I have seen but one vessel in distress in all my years at sea. I never saw a wreck, have never been wrecked, nor was I ever in any predicament that threatened to end in disaster of any sort. Quote, by Captain RMS Titanic, 1912. Can't happen. I picked this out of The Economist in 2009, waiting for another Titanic. One of these two species is stupid. I used to worry because I know the areas that I've worked in and hydrographically there. I know the technology we use is very simple. The ship sounding was just a vertical shot. We got better than that now, but even so, a ship that's not ice strengthened is still easily can hit one of these things, and captains do not know how big icebergs are. I was on the naval ship one evening with a friend of mine, and we were up on deck, and this berg came sliding past. It was about as tall as the ship. And the officer of the watch marshaled a bunch of able seamen with a wooden pole to push the iceberg from the ship. And we laughed. I mean, it's not a laughing matter, believe me. And the naval ship was much bigger than the Biscoe. I think that was 4,000 or 5,000 tons. Even so, it was absurd. Obviously, he'd never taken any physics or engineering. It was just absurd, but so easy to happen, and there's nobody to rescue you. This is Mount Vinson, a photograph taken by one of my friends who is a partner in an Antarctic logistics firm, and he will fly you if you want somewhere halfway up Mount Vincent's so that you can claim you've climbed it. There are a bunch of people who want to climb the biggest peaks on the planet. This is the sort of plane that he uses to get stuff in and out of Antarctica, different from my day. And you can see it's got wheels. That's because a lot of the interior really hasn't got much snow. They can land on wheels, it's ice. This is an evening shot of Stonington, and in the foreground you can see, I should have picked out a better slide. This is the old American base of Finroney, and that is Millerand Island, and there's sea ice beyond there. But this is on Stonington Island. That's the sunset. We had beautiful sunsets. That's it. Are you still there?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. That was great.
Yes.
You still awake?
Yes.
You're still awake.
Ivor, that was great. So if you want to, you can click the red button on top that says stop sharing.
Oh,
Good.
Here we are.
All right. And then go to your picture or somewhere in the bottom, and there should be a line through the video camera. Click on that.
On the bottom,
You'll see a video camera with a line through it.
it says start video.
Start video. There we go. Bingo.
Oh.
You're back.
There
You're
you
back
are.
with
We
us.
see you.
Right,
There we go.
right.
Ivor, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Have you ever read the book Antarctica by Gabriel Walker?
No.
No? I
Yeah.
got it in front of me. Somebody gave it to me for a present because they know I like to study all kinds of engineering things.
Uh-huh.
Well,
What
how
year
about
was
that?
it written?
Yeah, in one sentence, I can tell you that when you go to Antarctica, you have to live the life of Antarctica. You do not live your own life. And I mean, and I think you know what I'm driving at, because you have to follow the rules and use common sense, you know, and keep safety number one.
Safety number one, absolutely. It is an extraordinary thing. Somebody wrote about avalanches in the globe recently, and I felt compelled to respond. And my letter was actually published because I actually triggered an avalanche in Antarctica and nearly lost my life. And those of us who have worked with the British down south now have oral memories which have been transcribed and put somewhere. And we listed some of the what are called nowadays near-death experiences. The rule number one is know your mountain, know your weather conditions. And I see so many people who die on the mountain. They go for a simple hike. They do not understand that if you have an icy path, you can slip off it with your shoes. You haven't got the right shoes, and you can die. I mean, really simple stuff. I've skied the top of Mount Washington several times. So that's Tuckerman's Ravine, if anybody here's done it. It's not. When I was on the faculty at Babson College, my dean then, a guy called Bill Glavin, had read in the paper of people that climbed and skied down Mount Washington. He thought they were lunatic. And then somebody told him that I did it. I did those things with my son. And so he called me in because he thought it was irresponsible. And of course, I said to him, look, you should worry about people who can't do that, not people who can do that. End of conversation.
Right. Well, one other thing I'm going to tell you is that Gabriel Walker has a PhD from Cambridge University. So she's a Brit.
Ah, good. I should meet her. I do go there. If ever any of you go to Cambridge University and you go to the Scott Polar Research Institute, there is a memorial there to sled dogs. And there is a sled dog, it's in bronze, and listed are the names of all the dog teams that the British used, and leading first, there are two columns. The first column is the admirals, because they are letter A. That was my team. And the second team was the second column was the Huns, and that was my buddy, Dave Nash. That was his team. So the Huns and the admirals, we traveled literally. People don't understand. We went thousands of miles. I've been thousands of miles. They are the most incredible animals. So anyway, enough.
No, I understand. I mean, all my in-laws are in Britain. I mean, my wife passed away a few years ago. She was from London herself, you know, so, and then what was also interesting relative to you, I have a cousin he died, but he's from Australia, you know, and he was an environmentalist, and he spent many a time down in Antarctica.
Sure.
You know?
Actually, if you want to find out place names, my place name is listed in the Australian Antarctic place names, actually. I have no control over place names, and the fact that I'm on a map is something great for my grandkids, but nobody would ever know. The name Morgan is plastered over this continent, but there aren't many of us actually even here, so God knows who they were, but I've met one or two of them, but not many.
But I thank you for
Ivor-
doing this talk. It was extremely interesting and somewhat personal for me because I did have a relative who actually went there.
Aha.
And
So
I was close by, and I've traveled myself, but coming from New England, my wife and some of these people who had never been to cold places, they wanted to go to simulated Antarctica or places like that. I says, you go in, I won't go in.
Ah,
I lived through 3 blizzards in New England and 40, that's enough.
ah. Well,
Well-
I'll be totally frank. I did not know what I was doing.
Mhm.
It's like you live things. When I was in the Air Force, I didn't know what I was doing there either. So Her Majesty the Queen writes a letter. It's the draft. You've got to do it. You went in. It's the same. I did have a choice about going to Antarctica, and I wanted to do something different. It might have been, having grown up during the war, I wanted to do something else. But I have friends who have been lifelong friends from those days.
Mhm.
Sadly, I get obituaries, a stream of them these days, because I'm an old person.
Well, so am I.
A question, did you eat any of the wildlife?
Yes, of course. Did I eat it?
Yes.
Yes, indeed. Seal liver is the best liver I've ever had in my life. And the best seal liver is crab-eater seal, my judgment. Seal steak, but I've eaten seal steak. And penguin eggs, I was told that they laid again if you took their egg. I didn't stand around to see if they did, but that's what I was told by people who knew. And so we used to have very rarely penguin egg omelets and stuff. We craved food, fresh food. We didn't have any. We caught fish. There are fish down there called notothenids. They have big heads, little bodies. And so we could catch those. You just dropped a piece of blubber on a string, and these fish would grab the blubber. You pull them out. This is out of a hole in the ice. No problem at all. So we did do that. But yes, I did, but not that often. I spent a lot of time in the field, and so we carried our food, we carried our gear. That gear going up a mountain was 80, 90 pounds on our backs, because the tellurimeters required a battery. It was an aircraft battery. It was plastic on the outside. I've forgotten the weight. It would have been 15, 20 pounds, I'm sure. So we carried the battery, we carried the tripod, of course, theodolite, all of these things, and the tellurimeters. So this was, well, I could probably still carry that. I might be in a hospital after it, but I wouldn't recommend, for old people, I would not say that was the way to spend your time.
Well, there were a bunch, David, I see your hand, but there were a bunch of questions in the chat. So David, ask your question, and then those of you who put questions in the chat, if you could just self-identify and ask your question, I think that would be the best thing to do. Go ahead, David, unmute and go for it. There we go. You're unmuted.
I was in the Navy at the time, and I understood that the Navy had a base down there. Did you ever run into Seabees who stayed there?
The only Americans I actually met down there were from Coast Guard. And one of the American Coast Guards came in to Adelaide base, and they came on base. And the thing that impressed these guys was how tidy our place was, which said something about naval or Coast Guard tidiness. But that was an icebreaker. It was, you probably know more. I think it was like the east wind or the west wind. I don't know. That was a sort of name. And but I met nobody else. And I say I worked in the British Navy. I was very glad that I did not spend my service days to the British Navy. I mean, these guys that they would have done well with Lord Nelson, but not. They actually tried to quote Nelson every time they sent a message to another naval ship. Can you imagine? I mean, just bizarre. Anyway, the Air Force, the Royal Air Force is a much more egalitarian outfit for obvious reasons. And that was true when I was on the Air Force base in Britain, but it's been true my whole life. I was very pleased to be in the Air Force.
Ivor, there was one question in the chat from Mike Alexander. He says, if Antarctica is so dry, why is there so much ice or glaciers?
Well, we're talking about today, and the answer to that is clearly very complicated. I had a slide somewhere. I didn't want to show you that. It's not mine. Where somebody has gone back 700,000 years in ice coring. Yes, and that's impressive, but it means that there never was very much. The only heavy snow you get now, I'm told that there are parts of the eastern side now that's getting more snow than they have done. I have no data to support that. I do know Western Antarctica had more snow than the east side, on the east side of, say, the peninsula than on the west side of the peninsula than the east. So I don't know the answer to that. And I don't know whether this warming, which is very evident to me, I went down, say 6 years ago. It was a trip organized by one of my cohort who had been at Halley Bay. And he discovered that people who had lost their lives down there working for the British had never had a memorial. So our trip was a memorial trip for those who had lost their lives working for the Brits. And while he was at Halley Bay, some friends of his had gone out to the mountains and they had dropped through what we call a hole, a crevasse, and they had died. And there was no memorial of any sort. So as we went around our trip, they wanted some old timers to come down. So I went down and my wife came. She'd heard about it. She's known my Antarctic friends for all of our married life, pretty much. So she'd heard about the Antarctic. So she had to cross the Drake Passage. We started off with Ushuaia in Argentina. And the number of places that we actually had, I had no idea that we'd lost that many people. No idea, no idea. However, having lived there for 2 years of my life, I can see that it's so easy to do.
What's the relative population summer and winter between in Antarctica? Yeah, I mean, clearly it's warmer in Antarctica. It's more conducive to exploring and all that stuff. Winter is a little more brutal, but it doesn't. The population doesn't go to zero, does it?
No, I was there in winter. I've wintered twice. But the winter group is tiny, tiny, tiny. Doesn't matter what country. The summer group now, because of the change in technology and the ability to dump people with very large aircraft, the summer projects are massive. relatively speaking. So I don't know what the percentage. My guess is less than 10% of summer population.
Does Harry Fosdick was asking, given that the sky in Antarctica is so clear, is just the weather the reason why they don't put any astronomical bases there to do science?
I would think the primary reason is logistical, is the cost of what's happened with projects. I was talking to our present leader at BAS, who is a woman now, what projects they're doing. And of course, they're doing this one there on the Thwaites. A lot of the new projects require a lot of money. And so I have spoken to some people in the Harvard department that look up at stars and things. And they're always interested in having clear skies. There's absolutely no question in my mind that that's the clearest place to be. But to get there, you have to load in so much stuff and have such a budget. I think that that's probably the reason they haven't done it. It is truly extraordinary when you're there and you look up the night sky. And I tell you, I had difficulty. I was very informed about the southern skies, because to do star shots, you have to be able to name stars in 4 quadrants. And I was pretty good. Obviously, you know where the Southern Cross is, that you take a few minutes teaching people. But the number of stars up there in the sky are absolute. And I made a mistake on one star. And the people back in England actually corrected me. They said, you mistook that star for this one. And they corrected it because they knew exactly where I was. And they were able to correct my reading because I had misidentified a star. However, if you'd seen the stars are extraordinary.
No, it will not.
Excuse me, we're having crosstalk here. Do you mind muting if you're not speaking? Go ahead, Ivor. I'm sorry.
Can I?
Yeah,
Can
Tony,
I ask
please.
a follow-up question about it? Is it also possible that by having an observatory there, you would only be looking at the southern pole part of the sky, as opposed to, let's say, Hawaiian or Chilean telescopes that can see the entire sky during the year?
Well, it's not really so. I mean, you're right. If you're part of the spinning part, you're going to see a different aspect. So you can't see northern stars from the southern pole. That's correct. However, the ones you can see, you can see so much better. So we haven't got a possibility in the north, because we're about to lose all of our ice in the north. And that's another thing that has happened in recent years. A number of my friends who are working south are now working in the north as well. They work in the north in summer. The young woman that I said, pilot, who was taking the video that so impressed me, she works in the summer in the Arctic. And so there, you now have, but this is all more money. It's money, 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 you know. We did everything on a shoestring. My dogs lived on base on seal. And when we're in the field, they had meat bars like I had. I mean, we were so low cost when you think of it, and we weren't paid very much either. Yeah. So none of that has stayed the same. The salaries are up, and the logistics are unbelievable. And the melt has got something to do with this. So that's why we get the projects we now have, I think, because of the intense interest in global melt. But believe me, when my friends talk about if the whole of Antarctica were to melt, we're talking about a sea level rise of between 100 and 190 feet. And I guess it depends where you are in your thinking, which end of that you are. But we're talking about orders of magnitude that people are not even thinking about yet. And Mar-a-Lago will be gone. I used to finish my talks to the kids. I said, you know, when the cows are grazing on the Morgan upland, Florida will be no more. It'll be underwater. And they thought I was joking, of course. These are my grandchildren's age, but they listened to me. I still believe, of course, I believe that. I mean, Florida just ain't going to be there. Unless we do something, it's just not going to be there.
Well, aside from buying waterfront property in Kansas, Charlie Holbrook put a note in the chat and said there's a 10-meter telescope in Antarctica on the Anderson Scott South Pole Station. So that was an interesting factoid. I didn't know if you knew that.
Sorry?
There is a 10-meter telescope at the Scott Amundsen South Pole Station.
Aha.
I mean, that's a serious observing telescope,
Yes.
10 meters.
Yes, that is indeed. Yeah, that is indeed.
So I guess somebody found some money.
They found it in your bank account, I think.
No, that was my cousin in Nigeria.
Yeah.
Going back for a moment to the treaties that the various countries have, I suppose those that have signed the treaties have agreed to some things. How about the rest of the countries? Has anybody the right to just pull a ship over there and start digging for something? What does it mean not having signed the treaty?
I don't know, because as far as I'm aware, the logistics of actually getting anybody there and maintaining them are so complex that I am surprised who I do see there. You know, when I see a country like Ukraine taking over a British base, I'm saying, how on earth now that's a well-established base and it has all of the, you know, the equipment. I don't know what they did at the time, whether they gave the Ukrainians the ability to look at the upper air and so on. I am sure the British did not take out equipment because that is a logistical problem. So it's when you look at other places, the Chileans and the Argentinians, they try to populate it, you know, have little, but these people are not scientists, you know, so it doesn't go that way. No, it just is a mix. The Russians, of course, were there. But you say, why are they there? Why do you the pole of inaccessibility, which is a fascinating idea, and you get the lowest temperature on Earth and so on. So what, you know? I think it is important that we all understand what could happen down there because it impacts here. And that's what I try to tell people. Don't just listen to me talking about Antarctica because don't shut it out because it's Antarctica. Antarctica is gigantic. And if you I look at the north and I look at what I call dirty glaciers in Alaska. To me, glaciers should be clean. You saw some of my pictures, all the glaciers are white. You look at them up in the north, they're all dirty. They've all got dirt. They're melting. That's why they're melting in Alaska. You look at them in Chile, they're melting back. So it's just that Antarctica is so huge that it's going to have a massive impact to coastal regions in this country in particular. Louisiana, Florida. I mean, hey,
It's flooding in Florida now with the tides in certain portions of it. But we don't have any global warming.
no, in Miami, they think the water coming out of the storm drains is just an old seasonal thing, you know. They come out of the storm drains, for heaven's sake. No, it
Details.
Isn't. Yeah.
Anybody else? Any questions? Anything else that we can ask for Ivor?
Just
Go ahead.
out of curiosity, one more question, quick one. Why do they call it convergence when it seems to me it's a discontinuity rather than?
It is. I didn't create the term. I don't know why, but you're right. I do not know. And sadly, I can tell you that when I was down there 6 years ago, I remember when I was doing hydrographic work on a place called Peterman Island, which is off the west coast of halfway down somewhere there. And I was sitting on the top of Peterman Island one afternoon, and it was a beautiful day, and the air, when it's quiet there, it is so quiet you wouldn't believe. And I looked out and I heard this noise, and I looked out in the sea, and I saw about 50 whales plowing up and down, and about 80 seal in another patch. And I thought, my God, that's incredible. I saw nothing like it in my recent trip, nothing. I did see whales, very few. And I saw very few weddell seals. I did see one or two crabbies, but what I saw now are fur seals. So fur seals are everywhere. They used to be extinct practically. And you go up to South Georgia. And the elephant seals were never really far south anyway, but fur seals now have just spread like a disease. So the livestock tells a story that is undeniable.
Ken, you had a question?
Yeah, did you have radios with you when you were traveling about, and can you just talk about?
Yeah. Ken, as I said, the Brits were on a shoestring budget. Yeah, we carried a radio. I actually carried a portable too, because I needed to listen to the times. There's a radio station that gives times. The radios that we carried were ex-World War II something, and very weak. And so we transmitted by, we were using Morse code. And so I use Morse, and I can still send in Morse, and I've not forgotten my call sign. It's amazing. It's like a military number, it's engraved in your brain. And so I could say, da-da-dit-dit, and then I go with my call sign, da-da-dit-dit-dit-da-da-da-da-dit-dit, and so on. And of course, people don't know what I'm talking about anymore. I said, well, that's it. That's how I said. My base had powerful transmitter, and they replied in voice. So I had a reply in voice, but couldn't do anything except in Morse code. And so all of our messages are in Morse. Yeah.
Mike?
Just with regard to the sea level rise and talking about Miami. Think about Harbor also.
I can't hear you very well, Mike.
Mike,
Yeah.
you're
Okay.
getting an echo.
Oh, I don't know what I do about an echo, but Boston Harbor also has large scale flooding, and the seaport district was built in an extremely flood-prone area. Other cities.
I'm sorry, I can't
Mike,
hear.
Mike, there's too much echo. I don't know what's going on, but we're getting it coming back. Dick Wagner, did you have a question?
It sounds like two computers, Michael.
Do you have, are you connected? I don't see you connected twice. So I don't know what you have going on.
Yeah, I just couldn't hear. I'm sorry. I have a hearing problem, which I think goes back to my days with the helicopters, but I worked in heavy industry too, and that was another, you know.
Does that help?
Helps a little bit.
Okay.
No, not at all. Nope, still echo. All right.
If you say one word at a time, you might be able to get through around the echo.
I was a slow talker.
Not when you're having 6 words repeated.
Well, I will say there is a major flooding problem in Boston, not just Miami. And Seaport, the new Seaport district was built in one of the vulnerable areas.
Yeah, it's not working. Can you understand, Peter, and relay it
Yes.
to me?
So Mike was saying the seaport was built in a vulnerable area. If you want to condense what he's saying, the seaport is very low compared to Boston Harbor, and that today it's even flooding. So it's just, it's just not even Miami, but it's close to home.
Yeah.
How's that, Mike? Shake your head. Close enough. Okay.
Mike, I totally understand what you're saying, and I have been puzzled. I have not seen any report in anywhere about this, and people are pumping money into developments like that. And I'm just totally puzzled. But you see, with my friends, I say I've been talking about this for 50 years. I think I lose credibility as soon as I start talking, because I start talking about Antarctica and they say, who cares about Antarctica? You know, I could talk to somebody in Pacific Islands where they're being flooded out of their homes, you know, and they understand what I'm talking about, but not in the seaport here in Boston. It's a waste of breath. Talk about it with my grandkids. My grandkids understand. Thank God. Thank God.
Exactly. Exactly. I see Shelley smiling, so I know that we're doing the right thing.
Yeah. Hey, Ivor, since 2000, sea ice has extended to all of the 13 fjords in Chile. So the sea ice has been growing from 55 latitude to 54 latitude. How do you explain that? Sea ice has been growing 1 degree latitude northward since 2000.
I can't. I haven't been, I know that there are a number of glaciers there. I have been on the Argentinian side. I have not seen the Chilean. I've only seen pictures of what's happening there.
Yeah, they've been growing and the sea ice has been extending. Also, Truvati Island in the Pacific has been growing and not diminishing by sea levels. The islands actually have been growing and not diminishing. I don't know any Pacific islands that have flooded out.
Well, we have to wait and see. It's very difficult to take little spots. You have to look at the overall picture. All I can say is that what I've seen happening in Antarctica, the melting on the mountains means that we're going to have more black rock. More black rock means more absorption of heat and less reflection of heat. And if the Antarctic were black and not white, believe me, there would be a radical difference in the amount of heat absorbed by this planet. So I don't know. I tell you, Shelley, that I am no longer, I mean, I still talk to my friends in the Antarctic world. When I got back, I didn't know what to do, and I joined a Canadian firm in the aluminum industry called Alcan. Came to North America and discovered that people had business degrees. So I went and got a business degree. And then they said, well, why don't you stay on faculty? And so I did in Canada over a couple of years. And then they said, well, you've got to get a doctorate. So I got one that was down here at Harvard. So I've been in a totally different world since. And I have only had one project directly myself dealing with Antarctica, and that was in Denmark. And I had a group of students in Switzerland. I was teaching in a Swiss school, and we had a group of students working with a firm called J. Lauritsen. J. Lauritsen is now mostly in, I think, refrigerator traffic. They had a fleet of Antarctic vessels. And I supervised a team of 6 very smart master's students to go up to Copenhagen and look into the future of polar shipping for J. Lauritsen. Fascinating trip. I love Denmark. It's one of the places I can walk around without being called a foreigner. There are not that many. And it was just a wonderful project. Some of their ships are famous in Antarctic world. The Kistadan, the Magadan, the Perladan. They are no longer in the business. The nature of that business has changed totally. And that was my last real project in Antarctica. The rest has been listening to my friends and looking at their work, reading papers. I actually read a paper written by somebody who had done research on the area that is now called the Morgan Upland. But it turned out he'd never been to Antarctica. He had done all his research using satellite data. He was Dutch, actually. But it's fascinating, you know. So I try, but, you know, we live other lives, and it has not been totally happy reading what I have read recently. It has been really quite sad.
Ivor, I'm looking at the clock now and realizing it's very late. So what I want to thank you for the generosity of your time and your presentation. It was really wonderful. I think many of us got a lot out of it and appreciate you sharing with us.
Well, I hope, I mean, if anybody wants to ask questions, please pass them to Peter, and feel free to do so. I say I'm still very much in touch with folk back in the UK in particular. However, it is a big, big subject. It is a big, big place. And I think that's what people forget. People forget.
That's great. Ivor, we're here every week. If you want to join us and just listen and share, we're happy to have you come back anytime. And thank you again.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Well,
it was great.
As we would say, and nobody here speaks Welsh, right?
That's right.
Cymraeg? No. I say diolch yn fawr I chi gyd. Thank you very much to you all.